Damien confidently walked onto the stage where the Transatlantic signing would take place, looked at me, and smiled meaningfully. He pointed straight at me and spoke loudly into the microphone. A relic of the past. An obstacle to progress. The words hanging in the air ruined what should have been the proudest day of my life. The spotlight burned against my skin, as if mocking me. I had imagined this day, standing under those lights, as the proudest moment of my career. Instead, I stood frozen. The contract worth $1.5 billion glowing on the screen behind me, while the man I had served for years chose to erase me with one public strike. Cameras rolled, pens hovered over paper, and I was the story now, not for triumph, but for disgrace. Some guests tilted their heads together, speculating about what I might have done wrong. Others avoided my eyes completely, unwilling to share in the spectacle. A handful met my gaze with pity, as though I were already erased from history. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stand straight, though every nerve inside me burned. Just hours earlier, I had received the hospital's message. My mother's heart surgery required insurance confirmation before noon. The policy tied to my position at Asterion Global was the only lifeline we had. With a single public humiliation, that lifeline was gone. Damien Holt's dismissal of me wasn't just the end of a career. It was the severing of my mother's chance to live. It was bitter irony. My title was Lead Compliance Orchestrator, the architect of the very safeguards that allowed this contract to exist. 16 months of my life had gone into designing the timer lock verification system, a framework meant to guarantee fairness across 2 continents. I lived in the fine print, coding until my vision blurred, auditing until my bones ached. My work gave these men and women the confidence to sign their names today. Yet now, I was labeled obsolete. Across from me, Damien Holt radiated triumph in his tailored suit, smiling for the cameras as though he alone carried the weight of progress. Where I had fought for integrity, he thrived on ego. Where I believed systems should serve truth, he twisted them into props for power. His cruelty was not careless, it was intentional, a public stripping of dignity to cement his own image. I forced myself to stay upright as the humiliation echoed in my ears. Rage pressed against my ribs, but I swallowed it down. This was not the place to scream, not the time to crumble. If I broke now, Damien Holt would win twice, once by stripping my job, and again by taking my dignity. For 16 months, my life had been consumed by a single mission, designing the timer lock compliance framework that guaranteed this $1.5 billion transatlantic deal could happen. My title, Lead Compliance Orchestrator, wasn't glamorous, but it was indispensable. The framework was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Both continents had to authenticate their signatures simultaneously, within seconds. No loopholes, no shortcuts, no unilateral commands. If the process was corrupted, the system reversed, shutting down every pending transfer. I knew it wasn't flashy, but fairness never is. It is quiet, rigorous, unyielding, and for 16 months, I gave it everything. Nights blurred into dawn as I wrote line after line of code, each one another lock against fraud. My fingers cramped until I could barely hold a pen. My eyes stung from staring into the light of a laptop long past midnight. Colleagues joked that I lived in the server room, surviving on vending machine coffee and sheer will. I didn't do it for the glory. I did it because the world needed to know that deals at this scale could be clean, untouchable by ego, and because I had promised my mother something when she was first diagnosed, sitting beside her in that sterile hospital room, listening to the slow beeping of her heart monitor. I had whispered, "I will protect the truth. Mama, I won't let them crush me, no matter how much they try." That vow had carried me through every sleepless night, every condescending remark from executives who thought compliance was just red tape. And now, in front of the cameras, Damien tried to erase all of it with one smirk. He thought if he branded me obsolete, the world would forget the framework existed, that it was his vision alone powering this historic moment. My chest burned with fury, but I kept my eyes steady, because I knew something he didn't. The system recognized integrity, not arrogance. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. One of the European ministers leaned toward his aide, speaking low but sharp. I didn't need to strain to know what he said. The words carried just enough for me to hear. "Without her, I won't sign." The knot in my stomach tightened. A flicker of vindication cut through the humiliation. Brief but real. Even among the spectacle, someone still saw the truth. Someone still understood that I was not a relic. I was the lock, the safeguard, the invisible spine holding this ceremony upright. But instead of relief, that recognition only deepened the ache, because I knew Damien would never allow it. To him, integrity was weakness, and weakness had no place on his stage. Damien Holt thrived under the blaze of the spotlight. His grin widened, as though the humiliation he had just unleashed wasn't enough. He wanted to stretch it, to savor it. With arms outstretched, he welcomed the applause of the room like it was his birthright. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice rolling across the hall. "Today, Asterian Global delivers progress. Today, we free this $1.5 billion contract from the shackles of hesitation and unnecessary red tape. We move boldly, as leaders must." The word free stung like acid. He wasn't freeing anything. He was shackling the truth, binding it under ego and illusion. My framework had been designed to ensure fairness, to require full audit clearance before a single dollar moved. Damien knew that. He had read the conditions, seen the reports, and ignored every red flag I raised. Yet here he stood, twisting the narrative, branding my integrity as hesitation, my safeguards as chains. The hall erupted in polite applause, though it was strained. I noticed the hesitation in the clapping. The uncertain glances passed between dignitaries. They didn't understand the details of compliance, but they knew arrogance when it strutted in front of them, and Damien wore it like a tailored suit. My anger simmered under my skin, pressing against my composure. I wanted to shout the truth, to call out his reckless gamble, but I could already picture the headlines. "Disgraced employee disrupts historic signing." That was the trap. That was the reason he had fired me in front of the cameras, to muzzle me. If I snapped, I would hand him the victory. So I sat in silence, my fists curled against my lap, nails digging into my palms. I let the fury press tighter, compressing into something sharper. My mother's face flickered in my mind, her fragile body depending on surgery, depending on me. Damien wasn't just endangering money, he was endangering lives. And then it happened. He turned toward the biometric console, placing his palm flat with the flair of a showman. He pressed the command key with unnecessary force, his smile fixed on the audience rather than the machine. To anyone else, it looked like triumph. To me, it looked like suicide, because I recognized the motion. I had coded that panel, and I knew, with a jolt of cold certainty, that Damien had hit the wrong sequence. The override he believed was authorization was in fact the first step of reversal. The system had begun its silent countdown, not toward release, but toward collapse. My breath caught. I glanced quickly at the main screen, but nothing showed yet. To the audience, everything was normal, only I knew the truth. Damien Holt had just triggered the very safeguard he had mocked. My fury sharpened into something else, an almost unbearable tension. I couldn't warn him. I couldn't stop it. All I could do was sit there, rage buried deep in my chest, and watch as his arrogance set the stage for destruction. The numbers appeared on the giant screen above the stage. 0 o'clock, 02 minutes, 0 seconds, 0 o'clock, 01 minutes, 59 seconds, 0 o'clock, 01 minutes, 58 seconds. The audience leaned forward, murmurs swelling like the tide. To them, this countdown was the drum roll before the grand finale. The moment $1.5 billion would bridge the Atlantic. Proof that nations could unite through commerce. Smiles spread, pens poised for signatures. Journalists whispered about historic firsts, but my chest tightened. This wasn't the celebratory timer they thought it was. I had written those lines of code, stitched them into the system like nerves in a body, and I knew, with bone-deep certainty, what that clock really signaled. It wasn't release, it was reversal. I sat stiffly in the third row, my body rigid against the plush seat. Every beat of the countdown echoed against my ribcage, matching the wild hammer of my heart. I wanted to shout, to tear the illusion apart, but my voice would drown in the applause, twisted by the narrative Damien had already written. Fired employee, bitter and unstable. That was the headline he wanted. So I kept still. My hands rested on my knees, though my nails dug crescents into the fabric of my skirt. My throat ached with the words I couldn't say. I counted each second in silence, knowing what the final tick would bring. Around me, the audience's excitement grew. Delegates adjusted their ties, anticipating the moment they could boast to their governments about sealing this contract. Executives leaned toward each other, whispering about market surges. They were blind, willfully blind, because Damien's confidence was contagious. Then, for a fleeting second, I wasn't alone in my knowledge. Across the room, near the edge of the console, a young systems engineer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His eyes darted to the screen, then to Damien. Then, suddenly, to me. Our gaze locked, and in that brief connection, everything was said. He knew. His pupils trembled with fear. His throat bobbed as if swallowing the secret he couldn't voice. It was confirmation and condemnation at once. Confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the system was indeed marching toward collapse. Condemnation that we both had to sit in silence, watching the disaster approach, powerless to intervene without being branded as traitors. The clock ticked down. 0 o'clock, 01 minutes, 7 seconds. 0 o'clock, 01 minutes, 6 seconds. 0 o'clock, 01 minutes, 5 seconds. I forced my breathing to steady. Though my pulse thundered, my mother's face flickered in my mind again, fragile in her hospital bed. If the world saw me crack now, they would dismiss not only me, but the system itself. I couldn't give Damien that victory. I had to hold, no matter how much the weight pressed on my chest. The room buzzed with expectation, but beneath the surface, I felt the tremor of something else, a storm no one yet realized was about to break. And I sat in the middle of it, silent, tense, waiting for the impact. The countdown reached 0 at exactly 9:39 a.m. For a split second, the screen above the stage flashed green, as though the promise of release was finally here. Applause began to swell, then froze mid-air. The color shifted, green bled into crimson, spreading like a wound across the massive display. And then came the words that silenced the hall. Transfer reversed. $3,700,000 removed. Gasps tore through the audience. Chairs scraped. Ministers shouted across translation headsets. Instead of $1.5 billion bridging the Atlantic, an even greater sum had evaporated into nothingness. The deal wasn't just stalled, it had detonated. A French delegate slammed his fist against the table, shouting in disbelief. A German minister fumbled with his phone, barking orders in German as aides rushed to his side. Across the aisle, British representatives shouted at American officials, demanding answers. The hall, once choreographed for unity, dissolved into a cacophony of rage, and the noise only multiplied. Phones vibrated on every table, screens lighting up with alerts from banks and trading floors. The domino effect had begun. Within minutes, European banks froze all transactions linked to Asterion Global. Their systems, sensing the breach, locked down automatically. The ripple hit Wall Street like a storm surge. Asterion's stock ticker plunged 14% in the first 15 minutes, each percentage point wiping hundreds of millions from market value. Journalists, once poised to record a handshake, now thrust cameras into the chaos, capturing ministers storming out, executives shouting into phones, aides running in and out with frantic eyes. The room was bedlam. And then the final humiliation appeared. The giant screen flickered again. Code rolling across in blunt, merciless text. Authorization voided by user D. Holt. The hall fell into a stunned silence, but it was the kind that burns, not calms. The message was clear. The collapse hadn't been caused by sabotage, or a technical glitch, or an enemy from the outside. It had been triggered by Damien Holt himself, the man who had fired me minutes earlier. The man who had boasted of freeing the contract. His palm, his arrogance, his command had voided the very deal he wanted to claim. My breath caught in my chest. I didn't move, didn't speak. All around me, chaos reigned. But inside me, there was only a cold, quiet certainty. The system had worked exactly as it was meant to. Cameras swung toward Damien, capturing his face as the truth landed. The smug grin had vanished, replaced by a pallor that spread like ash. For once, the spotlight he adored showed him not as a conqueror, but as the architect of ruin. And I sat there, silent, watching the empire unravel in the very moment it was supposed to ascend. The roar of chaos hadn't even settled when Damien's voice rose above it all, sharp and desperate. "This is sabotage!" he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. His face was slick with sweat under the stage lights, his composure crumbling. Arya Knox, she corrupted the system. She's the reason this deal collapsed." Dozens of eyes snapped to me. Cameras turned, zooming in, eager for the villain of the hour. For a fleeting moment, I felt their judgment pressing down on me like chains. In their silence, I could almost hear the narrative forming. The dismissed employee, bitter and vengeful, striking back in humiliation. Damien had given them a story that was easy to believe. The board members flanked him, their voices calmer but no less insidious. One of them leaned forward, hands folded like a priest delivering mercy. "Arya, if you accept responsibility, we can control the damage, admit fault, and we'll restore your reputation quietly. The company needs a scapegoat, for the good of all of us. This doesn't have to follow you forever." My pulse pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to shout the truth until the walls shook. Yet another part of me, a smaller, weaker part, whispered of surrender. If I admitted guilt, perhaps I could salvage something, my mother's insurance, the dignity of walking out quietly rather than being dragged. False hope dangled before me, seductive in its simplicity. The audience seemed to sense it too. Ministers leaned back in their chairs, waiting to see me bow my head. Executives exchanged relieved glances, convinced the story would end neatly. The chaos packaged with a culprit. For a moment, they all believed I would bend, but I didn't. I reached into my bag with steady hands, though inside, fury churned hot enough to burn. From it, I withdrew a single folded sheet, the memo I had sent to the board 3 days earlier. My voice was even, calm enough to slice through the noise. "This is dated 3 days ago, addressed to the entire board." I unfolded it deliberately, holding it up so the cameras could see the company letterhead, my signature at the bottom. The words glared in black ink. Undeniable. If the system is forced into authorization before all audits clear, the safeguard will reverse. Transfers will collapse. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, charged. The false hope drained from the room, replaced by a dawning realization that spread across every face. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't a rogue employee lashing out. This was negligence. Damien's negligence. I lowered the page slowly, meeting Damien's eyes across the stage. His jaw clenched, his lips curling into a silent snarl. He knew. He knew the trap he had laid for me had just snapped shut around him instead. Anger still boiled inside me, but I kept it contained, folded tightly like the memo in my hand. My silence was not submission, it was judgment, and for the first time, the audience began to see who truly deserved it. I left the hall without looking back. The chaos behind me echoed faintly through the marble corridors. Shouts, hurried footsteps, the shrill ring of phones. But once I stepped into the cool air outside, silence wrapped around me like a second skin. My heels clicked against the pavement as I crossed the street to the cafe I had visited countless times during the long nights of preparation. Inside, the world was muted. The hum of the espresso machine, the clink of porcelain cups, the low murmur of ordinary conversation, all of it felt unreal after the storm I had just endured. I slid into a corner booth by the window, hands folded on the table, my face composed. From here, I could still see the glass facade of Asterian's headquarters. Inside, the empire shook itself apart, but I sat still, my reflection faint against the glass. Calm outside, fire inside. My thoughts dragged me backward, to those endless nights hunched over a keyboard, the glow of code bleeding into my tired eyes. I remembered scribbling notes across napkins, muttering lines aloud to hear if the logic rang true. And on the cover page of my notes, scrawled in black ink like a mantra, integrity over ego. The phrase had steadied me when exhaustion threatened to break me, when the temptation to cut corners whispered in my ear. It reminded me why I had built the system not to serve men like Damien Holt, but to survive them. The phone on the table buzzed. I glanced down, and the words carved into me deeper than any insult could. Insurance coverage expired. Surgery postponed. My mother's name was at the top of the message. I pressed the screen with trembling hands, reading it twice, 3 times, as if repetition could change its meaning. She had waited months for that operation, and because of one man's arrogance, because of a decision made under the spotlight, her chance had slipped away. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, willing my face to stay composed. Rage licked at the edges of my calm, but I forced it back down. If I lost control now, I would become exactly what Damien wanted the world to see: unstable, hysterical, weak. Ms. Knox? The voice startled me. I looked up to see a man in his 40s, a journalist I recognized from the press pit. He slid into the seat across from me, lowering his voice. I just came from the hall. His eyes searched mine, steady but not unkind. You should know. The world saw what really happened. They saw the warnings. They saw his hand on the console. They know. He destroyed himself, not you. For the first time that day, the tightness in my chest eased. Just a fraction. The fire inside still burned, hotter than ever, but his words were water against the flames, enough to keep them from consuming me whole. I nodded once, my voice low. Good. Let them see. And then I turned back to the window, watching the building where Damien Holt's empire collapsed under its own weight. The television above the cafe counter blared with breaking news. I didn't have to strain to hear. Every customer in the room had gone silent, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. There was Damien Holt, once untouchable, now cornered at the boardroom table. His jaw clenched, his voice raised, but the board members surrounding him no longer looked like allies. They looked like executioners. Sources confirm, the anchor announced. The European Union has officially voided the Transatlantic Agreement. The $1.5 billion contract is dead. Ministers cite gross negligence by Asterian Global. The words rolled through me with a strange calm. I stirred the coffee in front of me. the spoon tapping softly against porcelain. Across the Atlantic, trust had evaporated. Here in the States, panic grew louder. On the screen, charts flickered, markets plunging, red arrows stabbing downward. In just 3 hours, the anchor continued. Asterion has lost $9 billion in market capitalization. Several investment funds have begun divesting their stakes, citing lack of confidence in leadership. Dominoes, falling one after another, exactly as I had designed the system to reveal. It wasn't revenge, it was cause and effect. Integrity ignored becomes chaos unleashed. I took a slow sip, watching Damien wipe sweat from his brow as questions were shouted at him. Once, he had stood under lights as if born to them. Now the same lights exposed every crack, every lie. And then came the moment that made my chest tighten, not with anger, but with quiet vindication. A clip rolled of one board member I knew well, Stanton, the man who had dismissed my reports as alarmist and laughed openly when I pressed for stricter compliance reviews. He leaned forward in the meeting, his voice captured by a journalist's microphone. "We should have listened to Ms. Knox. This collapse is on us." The cafe erupted in murmurs. Some patrons turned toward me, recognition dawning. I kept my gaze on the window, pretending not to notice. Though inside, something deep and coiled finally loosened. I didn't smile, not outwardly. My face remained composed, neutral, the same calm mask I had worn while Damien paraded on stage. But within, a quiet satisfaction glowed. It wasn't triumph in his downfall, it was relief that the truth, buried so long beneath arrogance, was finally breaking the surface for all to see. Outside, the city rushed on, unaware of the storm-collapsing empires only blocks away. Inside, I sat in stillness, watching the man who had called me a relic drown in the weight of his own hubris. The microphones clustered around me like metal vultures, red lights blinking, ready to capture every syllable. For a moment, I thought of turning away, of vanishing back into the anonymity of the cafe, but the world wasn't going to let me disappear. Not anymore. A reporter with sharp eyes and a sharper tone pushed forward. "Ms. Knox," he called out, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Did you intentionally sabotage the Transatlantic contract? Did you destroy $1.5 billion to get revenge for your dismissal?" I straightened my shoulders, met the reporter's gaze, and spoke clearly, every word deliberate. "I didn't destroy anything. The system simply did what it was programmed to do, refused to bow to ego." Silence followed, thick and electric. I let it hang there, unbroken, so the words could sink in. At first, I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. A few scribbled hastily, already drafting the narrative of a bitter woman covering her tracks. For a moment, it felt like another defeat, another moment where the truth would be drowned by the ease of a villain's story. But then something shifted. A younger journalist near the front lowered his notepad slowly, his expression softening. A camerawoman nodded faintly, as if agreeing with what I had said. One by one, the silence broke, not with accusations, but with more questions, gentler ones. "Are you saying the safeguards worked as intended? Was this collapse preventable? Did leadership ignore your warnings?" The tide was turning. The narrative was changing. And for the first time all day, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. I answered each question calmly, refusing to let anger color my tone. I explained that the framework was designed to protect both continents from corruption, that every memo I had written emphasized the risks of cutting corners. "This was not sabotage," I said softly. "It was negligence, and negligence has consequences." When the press conference ended, I thought I would finally be free to slip away. But before I could move, a woman in a navy suit approached, flanked by 2 aides. She introduced herself quietly, away from the cameras, a representative of an international coalition on financial ethics. Her words struck deeper than any applause. We've followed what happened today. We want you to advise us, independently, on building global standards of transparency. The world needs people like you, Ms. Knox. Recognition. Not from Damien's stage, but from those who valued what I had spent 16 months fighting for. Relief surged through me, quiet but profound. For the first time, I wasn't defending myself. I was being invited to lead. When I stepped into the lobby of the International Coalition's headquarters, it felt as if I had finally walked out of a tunnel I'd been trapped in for years. For too long, I had been cast in shadows, dismissed, undermined, branded a relic. But now, each step carried the weight of vindication. The world no longer saw me as the woman humiliated on stage. They saw me as what I had always been, a builder of truth, a defender of fairness. This was never about revenge. I could feel that truth settling into my bones as I crossed the room. It was about something greater, restoring the standards that arrogance had shattered, proving that systems could be stronger than egos, that integrity could outlast illusion. A plaque rested on the table before me. My old name badge, the one Damien had stripped from me with such cruelty, lay beside it. My fingers hovered for a moment before I unpinned the badge, set it down, and felt its weight leave my hand for the last time. Then, with deliberate steadiness, I picked up the new plaque. The engraving gleamed under the lights. Aria Knox, Architect of Integrity. Systems don't bow to ego. Applause rose around me, not the staged ovation of executives, but the genuine recognition of peers who valued truth over spectacle. My chest swelled, not with pride alone, but with freedom. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the pressure of Damien's shadow pressing down. And then the television screen behind the podium lit up with breaking news. The headline scrolled in bold letters across the bottom. CEO Damien Holt resigns. Aria Knox appointed international advisor on transparency. A collective murmur filled the hall, followed by cheers. I let the words wash over me, grounding me in the irony of it all. He had tried to bury me in front of the world, but in the end, the world had buried his arrogance. I lifted the plaque high for a moment, letting the cameras capture it, not as a trophy, but as a symbol. This was not just my victory, it was a promise, because integrity is not noise, and justice is not spectacle. They are steady, patient, and unstoppable. And if you believe the world needs more stories where integrity prevails over ego, I invite you to share your thoughts below, to like, to pass this story forward. Let's remind others that truth still matters, and that sometimes the quietest stand becomes the loudest echo.